What's your darkest family secret that changed everything when you discovered it? It was a rainy October morning when the doctor told me my mother had died suddenly. No chance for farewells. I went home that day, numb and shattered, unable to process the emptiness in her now vacant room. A week later, while sorting her things, I found a plain white envelope in her secret drawer. No label, just a silent promise to be opened after she was gone. My hands shook as I lifted the seal. Inside was her final confession, a neatly written letter explaining she had battled stage 3 ovarian cancer in secret for 2 years. Alongside her letter were medical reports, chemo appointments, radiation dates, and notes about the waves of nausea she endured alone. I felt betrayed. How could she isolate herself like that? I thought we shared everything. My anger went deep, but as I read her words, I realized her silence had been a gift. She didn't want me to mourn her living, or carry her suffering. She had chosen to let me remember her as the vibrant, loving mother I knew. That quiet strength humbled me. I recognized love can live in silence, can protect in secrecy, can teach us something deeper than shared pain. I folded the letter, placed it back beside her ashes, and for the first time in days, I felt at peace. I didn't lose my mother. She gave me the strongest part of herself, and that truth will carry me always. It was early summer, and the air carried that dizzying scent of jasmine mixed with freshly mown grass. Everything about that day felt ordinary, until it wasn't. I had agreed to help my grandmother, Rose, downsize her home in preparation for assisted living. I expected photo albums and old dresses, but I wasn't ready for the moment the heirloom box revealed its secret. I found the small wooden chest tucked behind a stack of Sunday hats in her closet. Bound with fraying twine, it seemed fragile, as if it held memories too heavy for its shape. My grandmother hovered, uncertain, and eventually said, "You can open it. I think you should." Her voice was soft, but something in her eyes trembled with regret. Inside was a faded black and white photograph of my grandfather from when he was young and dashing, in a crisp suit, full of purpose, and arm around a woman I didn't recognize. Beneath it, layers of letters, yellowed and brittle. Then came the birth certificate. Not mine, not Mom's, but a name I didn't know. Born to a woman not my grandmother, several years before I was born. I sat there, heart pounding. Grandma's tears fell unchecked as I realized I was uncovering a truth carefully buried. I had a half-sister. My grandfather had fathered another child long before meeting my grandmother, and no one, ever mentioned her. When I finally spoke, my voice cracked. Why did nobody ever tell me? Grandma took a breath. Because she belonged to a different life. A life we couldn't bring into our own without pain. I felt an odd mix of betrayal and relief. Betrayed that my life was built on curated silence. Relieved that someone existed who shared our blood. My family's perfect image shattered. But in its place, a fragile thread of connection formed. I thought of my unknown sister somewhere, unaware of me. That night, I returned the box to Grandma, tears in both our eyes. "Keep it safe," I said quietly, "but let me know. When I'm ready, I want to meet her." And though the future was uncertain, the revelation changed everything. Families don't just protect, they also conceal. And sometimes it takes uncovering the hidden parts to reconnect with what was lost. When I turned 18, I applied for my father's last name, something I'd always taken for granted. My mother warned me, "You might uncover more than you expect." I thought she was just being dramatic. At the courthouse, I learned the truth. Legally, I wasn't the son of the man I called Dad. His name never appeared on my birth certificate. A mistake? No, he had officially denied paternity years ago. I had literally been made into a stranger in my own family. My world unraveled. All those moments, birthday dinners, fatherly advice, felt hollow. I confronted my mother later that evening. She admitted my father left soon after I was born, before her pregnancy was public. He'd refused to sign the certificate and stayed silent. I asked, "Why did you hide it?" Her voice shook. "I thought I was protecting you, from shame, from embarrassment. I didn't want you to feel broken." But I did feel broken. My name, my identity, everything had been rewritten without my consent. I was mourning the loss of a father I never truly had, and a life built on a lie. That night, I changed my last name legally to hers. A small act of reclaiming myself, but I still feel the silence of the truth lurking behind every family story. My mother always had a spotless reputation. Polite, professional, proper. So when I received a scholarship-funded envelope meant for expunged records, I didn't expect to find anything daunting. But inside, police documents from her youth. She'd been arrested at 22 for dealing small quantities of marijuana. Not chronic, not dangerous, but enough to earn a criminal record. A record my mother had carefully sealed and deleted over the years. When I asked her about it, she looked away. I didn't want my children to think less of me, she confessed. I was young and foolish. I felt both relief and a deep ache. I'd always idolized her as perfect. Now I saw the truth. She'd once been reckless, human, flawed. Her secrecy shattered the carefully curated image I'd inherited, but also gave me a strange sense of freedom. Our family history wasn't a pristine surface anymore. It was real, textured, and complicated. And while I still treasure her achievements, I'll never forget the day I realized perfection can be a cage. Sometimes, forgiving someone for hiding the real truth is the hardest redemption of all. It was supposed to be a perfect 30th birthday, a milestone, a celebration of adulthood surrounded by the people I loved most. My family had reservations at our favorite Italian restaurant, the one with warm wood paneling and the smell of garlic bread that reminded me of childhood. The evening flowed beautifully, heartfelt speeches, laughter echoing through the space, candles reflecting in my eyes as I watched my sister light the cake. Then, as I reached for the knife to cut the first slice, my father cleared his throat. That hush, that sudden shift in atmosphere, made me freeze. He looked at me with gentle nostalgia and began recounting the most important memory of my childhood, my first ever drawing, something I could barely remember in detail. He said he had framed it, saved it, cherished it, only for it to disappear as I grew older. Standing there, cake knife in hand, I felt the room spin. I took his words at face value at first, thankful, even moved. But later that night, alone in my apartment, doubts began to creep in. I checked my old boxes, rummaged through photo albums. There was no drawing, no frame, no hint of the memory he described. I asked my mother, who awkwardly changed the subject. I texted my sister and she said vaguely, "It was in Dad's office, but who knows where it is now?" I realized my father had created a memory out of thin air, framed not in reality, but in affection. He wanted to craft a narrative that portrayed him as sentimental, caring, always remembering the small moments. It wasn't just a lie. It felt like a gentle construction of who I should think he was. I felt used, manipulated, not out of cruelty, but from a place of loneliness or regret. The man who spoke so warmly at the table wasn't quite the person I thought he was. In the months that followed, I avoided family gatherings. I'd tuck that memory away, the memory I didn't remember, like a piece of a puzzle that didn't fit. I didn't confront him, because sometimes the hardest truths are wrapped in love. My grandmother's house was a time capsule of her life. Faded wallpaper, retro furniture, bowls of pins left over from sewing days. So when she asked me to go through her jewelry box, I expected trinkets, but never imagined I'd find evidence of a secret history. Halfway through, beneath silver earrings and costume pearls, I discovered a velvet pouch holding 3 train tickets. 2 bore familiar names, hers and my grandfather's. But the third carried my name, written in tiny, trembling script, dated months before I was born. I showed her. She didn't hesitate. With a cracked voice, she began a confession I'd never expected. She and my grandfather had planned a weekend getaway before I existed. At first, she said, it was romantic. An escape. Then she paused, tears forming. That ticket. It was to decide whether you were meant to come into this life. Her words stunned me. I had been the subject of a quiet, private negotiation. My being had been weighed and measured. Pleasure, risk, cost. It wasn't a story of destiny or fate at all, but of deliberation. I left her house slowly, holding the pouch in my pocket like a stone of doom and wonder. Days later, I thought about birth certificates, family photographs, the permanence of one's place in a family, and then the fragility behind it. I didn't want to question why I existed, but I couldn't shake it either. In the end, I never asked her to burn the ticket. Instead, I boxed it and kept it in my desk drawer. A memento of complexity. Life isn't always a given. It can be a choice, born from love, but tinged with doubt. My parents fought in silence for years, silent dinners, cold looks, heavy doors. One night, after Dad left for what would be the final time, my sister handed me Mom's diary. I hesitated, finger over the leather strap, but curiosity pulled me in. The entries were raw and intimate, day after day through that final year, the fear of them pulling apart, the nights spent crying silently so I wouldn't hear. One entry stood out. I could vanish, just walk out and never look back. But I'm staying. For her. Reading that, I realized she'd remained not out of love, but obligation. Every day she chose to stay for me. And yet, she never let me know how painful it was. She never reached out. I never had the chance to comfort her. That night, the betrayal wasn't someone else's. It was mine. I felt anger at being used as an anchor without consent. I felt guilt, knowing she sacrificed parts of herself so I could have a family. I felt deep sadness, because the version of my parents I thought I had was built on unspoken cost. When Dad moved out, I didn't hold the diary up as evidence. I just placed it quietly back on her shelf, pressed the clasp shut. Years later, I still sometimes wonder, what would have changed if she had shown me the hurt and if I'd offered her more than I knew to give? I grew up believing I was the youngest of 5, a miracle after years of selective birth order planning. But when my cousin, with genealogical enthusiasm, stumbled on my name in court records as adopted, something cracked. I confronted my mother in our kitchen over mugs of cold coffee. She looked down, took a deep breath, and said, "You were adopted, yes. We wanted you more than anything." Everything shattered in that moment. I was chosen, a term both beautiful and fragile. Not a piece of biology, but of longing. They had waited. They had prayed. They had given up. And then, they gave me everything. That revelation carried weight I couldn't define. I felt rooted and uprooted at once. Their love became intentional, personal, crafted, not inherited. Yet it also felt curated. I wondered how much of my identity had been pre-designed. I walked away with my cousin's printout in hand. I hugged my mother and said, not a question, but a whisper, "Thank you for choosing me." We never spoke of it again. Decades later, I still carry the badge of choice, a quiet pride and a quiet ache for something unsaid, yet understood. It was my mother's funeral when I first sensed the weight of Slack family secrets. A simple ceremony, just us and her closest friends, under the vaulted ceilings of her favorite chapel. We were singing Amazing Grace when the organist, one of Mom's dearest friends, choked mid-song, eyes brimming. Later, she pulled me aside in the foyer and said, "I'm sorry I waited until now." Confused, I gently pressed until she admitted that Mom had a secret affair, a friendship that crossed boundaries, with a man married to someone we all thought was her best friend. It lasted years. It was never about sex, she said, but about feeling alive. She wrote love songs for him, music she never shared, lyrics only in her notebook. That revelation shattered the image of the dutiful and faithful woman I'd known. My mother wasn't just serving others. She was longing, yearning, loving in secret. And she carried that quiet rebellion until the end. I felt both betrayed and decisively proud. That music, her secret music, revealed depth I'd overlooked in my own mother. I searched for those unwritten songs for years. They changed how I loved, how I hurt. Because sometimes the love that saves you is hiding behind the love you already understood. It began with curiosity, just a late-night impulse to submit a home DNA kit for fun. I expected to trace my roots, a sprinkle of Scandinavian, perhaps some Basque. What I didn't expect was to discover someone not on my father's family tree, a half-sister named Carlos Flores. Born months after I was, to the same mother. The results hit hard. I was stunned, my heart pounding as I thought, my mother had been pregnant when she married my father? I tried to call, but she was already asleep. Next morning, I showed her the profile. She studied the photo and whispered, "You have questions." It came out in sharp fragments. An accidental pregnancy in college, a father that my mother never talked about, adoption arranged, quiet support paid for requirements under the table. She had built her life anew, married, raised me, buried that chapter of her past very deliberately. I felt like a story rewritten by someone who thought forgetting meant healing. My identity was suddenly unpinned. Who was I, if not the only child? Who were the siblings I never met? The man I never knew? I didn't meet Carlos. Not then. But I changed my name back to my mother's maiden. Not because I wanted to erase my father, but because I wanted roots I could trust. Truth that wasn't traded in silence. In our small conservative town, faith and family were tightly woven. My father, an elder in the church, had always seemed incorruptible. So when I found a handwritten letter inside the family Bible, marked, "To my daughter, I'm sorry," I froze. The letter was from my father to a woman named Lily. She was not my mother. The words were raw with regret, describing a pregnancy, an abortion, his despair, his promise of silence. He'd returned to the church, found my mother, they married, and he built another life. The betrayal cut deep, not because he'd sinned, we were told all were sinners, but because he had lied us all, hidden his past behind piety. I confronted him quietly. He looked at me and said, "It was before you. I thought I could protect you from my failures." But I felt like a daughter built on grace he didn't deserve. Every Sunday sermon, every blessing, now bore weight of omission, of scripting forgiveness without truth. I left church for a while, sought therapy, reconstructed my relationship with him. Now I stand in that congregation again, stronger, but aware that sometimes sins aren't forgiven until the truth is told. My grandfather was the staunch provider, ranch owner, patriarch, legendary for his stern fairness. You didn't challenge him, you believed in his integrity. So when I found his old ledger in the attic, I nearly dropped to my knees. The pages were filled with entries, payouts to workers' wives, hush money, unreported loans, blackmail disguised as help. He had used his position to control, to silence. Not grand sins, but consistent cynical planning, a moral economy he'd built under the facade of farmland virtue. He died before I saw it. When I confronted my father, he sighed. He believed he was saving families. But I saw the other truth. My grandfather had weaponized power, kept elders quiet, exploited trust. I wrestled with that legacy. Blood bound me to him, as much as his sins bound me to a story I didn't ask for. One day, I burned the ledger, watched the pages blacken and curl. I needed to let that version of family truth die. I still own the ashes. Inside, a promise. Some secrets belong to history, but the future is for honest hands.